Please welcome our final panel on Insights from the C-Suite, California's Business Climate, moderated by Executive Director of the Institute's Center for Regional Economics and California Center, Kevin Klowden.
Thank you.
Greetings and good afternoon. I want to say thank you both to those of you who are timely enough to have made sure to come back into the room from all your interesting side conversations for this session, and for those of you who have decided to join us and stay here for the rest of the day. Once again, I want to take a moment to thank all of our panelists who've participated over the course of the day, all of you who've been here. Once again, a special thanks to our corporate sponsors in JP Morgan Chase and Blue Shield. Blue Shield, of course, is even being so kind as to contribute an excellent panelist to help us close the day. So, but what I would like to do now is lead into the final panel, which is Insights from the C-Suite, California's Business Climate. One of the things that's particularly important for us in terms of issues in looking at sustainability, at looking at housing, at looking at workforce, at looking at infrastructure issues, and wrapping this all together is, how does this affect businesses? How does this affect the businesses who want to work here, who want to employ people here, who want to expand here? And not just the businesses themselves, but the workforce at those businesses. In many ways, this panel is a culmination of the issues that we've had throughout the day. Issues of gender equity and diversity, issues of housing and being able to afford to live here and work here, let alone recruit people here. Issues in terms of what job skills are needed and what kind of skills businesses need to bring people here. We have a session that in particular is looking at the fact that California is perhaps the most innovative place in the world. It's certainly viewed that way externally. California routinely shows up and is identified with adapting and accepting change, coming up with new and innovative ideas, taking risks. But that same time, it routinely shows up as one of the worst business climates in the United States. Not because people don't want to do business here. People do. People want to live here. People want to work here. But because it costs so much to be here, it's so hard to find people to work here, to recruit people here. It's so hard to find housing. It's so hard to navigate the regulations. More than as much as people talk about the idea that California is overregulated, if you really dig deeply, what you find out, and we can talk about on the panel, is that it's actually navigating that process. It's the ease of doing the business, not the overall regulations themselves. And so what we have is 5 executives from California headquartered companies who will take on this dichotomy and discuss the perspectives of the state's biggest strengths, as well as their thoughts on how California's political leaders can have the biggest impact on the state's economic climate. Joining me today, starting from my right, your left, is Ann Hoskins, who's the Chief Policy Officer at Sunrun. Jeff Maggioncalda, CEO of Coursera. Mary O'Hara, who's the Chief Human Resources Officer and Senior Vice President for Internal Communications, which is apparently something I'm having trouble with at Blue Shield of California. Sandra Stern, who's President of the Lionsgate's Television Group. And Pete Vlastelica, CEO of Activision Blizzard's esports leagues. So this is a very distinguished group with a very diverse set of backgrounds and insights. And as such, we're going to go through and talk about some of those key things, that why they're here, why their company's here, why maybe they're not doing as much business here as they would like, and what we can do about it. So Ann, I'd like to start with you. How have California's regulations on renewables and construction been a boon to your business, and how has it caused issues?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Hello, everybody. I'm Ann Hoskins. I'm the Chief Policy Officer at Sunrun. I think everyone should know what Sunrun is because it's an exciting company that I'm part of, but I realized last night at the reception that not everybody does, so I'm going to take a minute to tell you. We're a residential solar company, and now we're actually a residential solar and battery company. And we operate in 23 states and Puerto Rico, but California is our home. It's where we're headquartered, and it's also our largest state with the most customers. And more importantly, and this goes to the issue, is that it is because of regulation and California's forward-looking policies that we are where we are. And Sunrun has been around for 11 years. We now serve almost 200,000 customers across the country. And how did this happen? And I think this is a really good example of the importance of forward-looking policy and regulation. Is the California legislature created the California Solar Initiative, which provided some initial incentives for solar. And then their California Public Utilities Commission created the right kind of framework so that customers could make investments in solar in their homes and also be treated fairly when they provide excess energy to their neighbors. What has happened in that time, over time, is now, people are starting to question, so what is the value of this to society? And what's so exciting to us, and where I think, again, regulation has a really important role to play, is technology has arrived with storage in the last 2 years. And so now we have customers with the ability to put storage on their homes, save that energy to when it's most needed for themselves and for their fellow Californians, and put it back on the grid and save all of society expense through reduced transmission costs, reduced gas plants, reduced peakers. The California ISO has found that distributed energy has already saved the state $2.6 billion by avoiding a transmission line. But what we're about to approach, and I hope all of you will become really aware of this issue, is now the California Commission is about to take another look at this and decide, should we reduce the amount of compensation for these customers who are putting their energy back on the grid? And this is where it's going to be really important, and what we're going to be advocating for is really critical principles of regulation. One, we can't make things too complicated. I moved here from Maryland, where I was a commissioner on that commission. And so I have some experience in this, and California Commission leads in creativity and just the knowledge of its staff, but let's not get too creative and too complicated. So we need simplicity for business to grow, we need simplicity for customers to be able to comply, and we need to be willing to enable enough flexibility so that we can have new technology. So I'll look forward to talking more about it. But so far, my view in California is it is the regulation that set the framework that allowed this incredible industry, over which there's over 100,000 solar employees in the state of California. And that all happened because of the foresight of good regulation and policy.
Great, and that is very much of a positive story. Now I'm going to flip things around and talk and instead focus on a legacy industry that's had some different experiences with regulation otherwise. Sandra, when you're talking about how should the state of California support the entertainment industry, who's one of its most high-profile and productive legacy industries, in order to foster its continued growth?
I am glad you asked that. It's something I like to talk about. Entertainment is a legacy industry in California. When I started in the business, we were doing about 95% of our production in Los Angeles. That is an enormous amount of production. Today, the entertainment industry employs pretty close to 2 million people. Lionsgate alone employs 22,000 people a year, annually. Of those 22,000, a very, very small percentage are working here in California, despite the fact that Los Angeles, California, is the most logical place, the place best suited to do production. So what's happened? Production has expanded, it's increased. There are over 500 original scripted TV shows being produced currently, annually. And again, only a small percentage of those shows are being shot in Los Angeles. We're losing much of our production. We're losing many of those jobs to competitors in New York, now in New Jersey, in Atlanta, in Louisiana, in Tennessee. Of the 100 TV shows, scripted shows that we've produced in the past 15 years, probably half dozen have been shot in Los Angeles, and that is shocking. So what's happened? What do these states know that we don't know? What are they doing that we're not doing? And there are several major answers to that. First and foremost is tax policy, soft money tax credits. California has instituted a program, but it is not, and in fact, it was just renewed, I think $330 million renewed in the past couple of months. But those programs are not competitive with the programs in other states. I can tell you that Lionsgate has never once qualified for a tax credit in California. We get tax credits in New York. We shoot several shows there, in Atlanta, in Canada, in the UK, in Eastern Europe, pretty much every place but Los Angeles. It's an enormous disincentive. If I can get 25% of my budget covered by the state of Georgia, it's 25% of the budget. That is a check that we can get. There's got to be a very, very good reason to shoot in Los Angeles. Add to that, we don't have affordable housing. The business, the production business is largely a transient business. People follow the work. The below-the-line people go where the work is. Anecdotally, when we instituted the tax credits in New Mexico about 11 years ago, and I gave a commitment to the governor, then Governor Richardson, that we would have production in the state of New Mexico for a minimum consecutive production, continuous production for a minimum of 5 years. In fact, I lied. We have been there consistently for the past 11 years. They have made it very, very attractive. Year one, there were no crews. There was no skilled labor. We had to import everybody in. But the government, the governor, instituted a training program to train people, to incentivize us to train people and require that we give them jobs when they were fully trained in exchange for the tax credit money. Today you go to New Mexico, that field where we shot our first season is now a Walmart with tons of housing and a very, very robust tax base. And that's thanks to the tax credits. It is thanks to housing policy that was, again, instituted by New Mexico, subsidized housing, rent control, incentives to build housing in urban areas, in metropolitan areas, all things that would really benefit the entertainment industry. Housing, tax credits, mass transportation in metropolitan areas. And many of those 2 million jobs can come back to California.
Now, since the issue of housing particularly came up, and actually the fact that housing was being built specifically, that raises an issue I want to throw your way, Mary, and that is that housing is directly also tied in very significantly to the issue of cost of living. How does cost of living affect your ability to attract and retain talent with Blue Shield, especially given that you are located in a rather high-cost environment?
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I'll just tell you a little bit about Blue Shield before I answer the question. We are headquartered in San Francisco, and across the state, we insure over 4 million members. And what you may not know is that the Blues across the country, they're all independent, but the reality is that insofar as insuring Americans goes, that's about 1 in every 3 Americans is covered by a Blues plan. And our belief, frankly, our mission is pretty fundamental in order to achieve our mission, which is really fundamentally about making sure that all Californians have access to affordable, sustainably affordable, high-quality care, that it is worthy of your family and friends. Well, what does that actually mean? That means that we've got to have administrative costs that are kept as low as possible, because when those administrative costs go up, we actually have to pass that on to our members, and that shows up in the form of your premium costs. And frankly, it's our belief that if you look at the data, the cost of healthcare in this country is bankrupting this country. And it's just not sustainable. So we work incredibly hard to try to deliver that mission, which is to make sure that all Californians have access to sustainably affordable care that's high quality. That means then, if you are operating in a state that is literally the most high cost of living, just a few facts for those of you who are not living this every single day. The fact of the matter is, in the Bay Area, it's 193% above the national average in terms of the overall cost of living. 193% above the national average in terms of the cost of living. That's things like groceries, which is 125% above the national average. Housing alone in the Bay Area is 360% above the national average. So if you take all of those things into account, and our philosophical belief is that the average bear comes to work for a company with a belief that they're going to help you win, and they're going to bring all of their talents to bear, and they're going to stay there and help you win on the belief that you are going to provide them opportunity to grow personally, professionally, and financially. And that's extraordinarily challenged if, from an administrative cost point of view, your goal is to keep that low. Because again, your mission, in our case, is to make sure that we're doing everything we can to take costs out of the cost of care. But in a situation where you're competing every single day with companies like Facebook and Google in Silicon Valley that are able to provide the kinds of benefits and offset the cost of housing that companies like Blue Shield, that is fundamentally riveted around Californians, cannot compete with, you're driving up the costs from an administrative point of view, which means that we've got to be highly innovative and highly creative every single day to try to compete with those sorts of companies so that talent like you would pick us and come and work for us and is able to work for us. In the city of San Francisco, the average one-bedroom rent is about $3,400 a month. Now, if you're a millennial or you're relatively new in your career and you don't have a whole bunch of personal equity that's been built up, that's an extraordinarily challenging place to live. If you're headquartered in San Francisco, you need people that are able to live and work in that area. You need a transit system that is safe. In the last month alone, 3 people have been murdered on the Bay Area rapid transit system. Not only is that a challenge for us in terms of providing, a system, and it is a system, not just housing. Transportation is tremendously important. You have to feel a level of safety. I'm sure many of you are paying attention to what's in the news about conferences that are no longer situating themselves in San Francisco, given the safety issue, given the drug and pervasiveness issue that's happening, that's very, very obvious to people that are thinking about business in the city of San Francisco. So those kinds of things make it enormously difficult. Tax reform did not help the state of California. As a matter of fact, it made it even more challenging. State deductibility of taxes made that more challenging. Things like, again, affordable housing, which is clearly a challenge for us. Importing people to this state means you've got to offset where there's an increase in state tax. Otherwise, people just won't even consider coming here. And bringing the talent shortage into importing talent to deal with this talent shortage means higher administrative costs for companies like Blue Shield. So it's a very complex set of issues, but certainly housing, transportation, taxes, including the talent shortage, are significant in our ability to compete and to sustain, to be able to deliver against the mission that is so fundamental.
Well, you're talking about the talent shortage and the ability for the state of California to produce people locally who can actually fill those jobs so that you don't have to spend a huge amount of resources recruiting people into a high-cost environment is particularly significant. Jeff, in contrast, you say what do you see, the key trends in jobs and work do you see affecting businesses here in California? And how do you see the UC and community college system preparing young Californians for those trends?
Right. Thank you for having me here. And Mary, I appreciate your comments. I would really key in onto the talent piece of it. Coursera is a company located in Mountain View. We employ about 300 people. It was founded by 2 Stanford professors in computer science who decided to put one of their courses online. It was called a MOOC, a massively open online course, in 2012. And over the years, it has grown into a fairly large and global business. So you can think of Coursera as kind of a learning ecosystem that pulls together learners and educators and employers onto this technology platform. So we have 34 million learners from around the world who have come to Coursera to learn and prosper. We have 1.4 million from California. We have the largest country represented is the US, followed by India, followed by China, followed by Mexico, followed by Brazil. And it's really extraordinary to see the number of people around the world who are coming to Coursera to take courses that have been published by 160 of the top universities in the world. And 6 of these universities are 6 UCs, which are ranked in the top 100 schools in the world. So we have an amazing asset in higher education here in California. And we also have university partners in Europe and in Asia and in Australia and in Latin America. The third piece of it, in addition to the learners and the educators, are the employers. So Coursera launched Coursera for Business, where businesses can hire Coursera to offer our catalog of 2,800 courses to their employees, to upskill their employees. And the real domains that are getting the most traction are business courses, computer science courses, and data science courses. And we started with just open courses, but now we've actually started offering fully accredited master degrees as well. Masters in computer science, masters in public health, masters in data science. And these degrees are typically less than half of the tuition of a typical school. So we're in Mountain View, and as I think about the challenges that we face, it is absolutely how much does it cost to hire an engineer? It costs a lot of money to hire an engineer. It is absolutely a supply-demand imbalance, so there's a talent shortage. And what happens when you have a shortage of something, then the price goes up. And I think a lot of the wage inflation has led to a housing price inflation. And one of the ways to deal with this talent shortage is to provide higher quality access to education to more people. So if you look at California, you know, the economy is doing well, especially in the high-tech sector. That is not serving all the residents of California well at all. We have exodus of Californians who are leaving the state because they don't have the most in-demand skills, and so they can't afford the housing. And that housing stock, as you've seen from the charts outside, has not at all been keeping pace with the demand for jobs and the income that we're paying to some of these high-tech workers. So our view is to try to make high-quality education available, and I think with California we have an incredible set of assets, both in terms of the UC system, which are globally recognized as the best educational institutions in the world. They educate about 230,000 students, 40% of whom come from low-income families, and the fastest path to upward mobility is to get a high-quality college degree. But you also have the California Community College system, which educates more than 2 million. And I applaud the state's initiative on, as you can probably imagine, on doing an online community college. And what we've seen at Coursera is even the best universities in the world are moving their education and their curriculum and their degrees online. And a major reason is that most adults who will have to learn for the rest of their lives, because the world's changing, skills are becoming obsolete, and many jobs will be automated, they can't afford to stop working. So if you believe that there's going to be lifelong learning, and you believe that people are not going to quit their jobs in order to learn, it stands to reason that people will learn on the job. And having digital mechanisms that are much lower cost and much more convenient from the best universities and colleges is a great way to do that. So we look at what's happening in California, and we really celebrate the possibility of taking these educational systems and expanding the access to many more people. And I can say that with our experience in India and our experience in Latin America, we are seeing literally hundreds of millions of people moving online in order to get access, and it is no longer just a fantasy. The technology and the ability to connect learners and educators and employers is making it possible for a wide range of people who never had access before to get access to really high-quality education.
Thank you. Now, in contrast, Pete, you're in a different situation that you actually not only operate a company that is much a sports league as a technology company, but you've got a tremendous concentration of talent that you operate out of. In many ways, that you are somebody who leads a company that benefits from a clustering of talent. But that being said, how vital is that concentration of talent here in California, especially Los Angeles, to your business? And is that concentration of talent under threat?
Yeah, so thank you. I represent a division of, excuse me, of Activision Blizzard, which is one of the largest game companies in the world, called Activision Blizzard Esports Leagues. So we operate sports leagues around our most popular video games. So we operate a league called the Overwatch League and a league called the Call of Duty World League and others. And so while we sort of sit inside of a gaming company, which sometimes gets lumped into the entertainment industry, sometimes into the technology industry, we're very much a sports organization. And so I come at that question sort of seeing it as an opportunity to sort of treat this phenomena of esports as a chance to reset the sports industry and to reset it based on a new type of talent, and also to start drawing talent from where sports talent is currently sort of drawn, which is New York City, to Los Angeles and to California more broadly. Los Angeles has a real opportunity to establish itself as the international hub of the esports industry. And while that might seem small to those who don't follow esports, let me give you some numbers and maybe it'll start to seem a little more significant. So about 350 million people watch esports today. We operate some of the most popular leagues. Let's take the Overwatch League. This last weekend we had our finals for the Overwatch League, which is the first global city-based esports league in the world. So we have 12, soon to grow to 18, soon to grow to 28 permanent franchises based in cities around the world, owned by people like Robert Kraft, who owns the New England Patriots, or Stan Kroenke, who owns Arsenal and the LA Rams. Actually, the Milkens are part of one of our groups, as is Lionsgate.
I am too.
That's right. So really fantastic ownership groups, fantastic sponsors. Our grand finals were broadcast last weekend in prime time on ESPN. We are now expanding the league, selling franchises for 2 or 3 times what we sold them for even last year because of how we've over-delivered. We sold out the Barclays Center in about 2 hours for a 2-day event. And on and on. So if you're not familiar with esports, I encourage you to check it out. In particular, if you're a sports fan and looking for where the growth in sports is going to come from, because the average age of an NFL fan is 50 years old, and 10 years ago the average NFL fan was 40 years old. So it's going the wrong direction. And baseball fans are in their 60s on average, which I think they're 63 on average, which, for 63 to be the average age of a baseball fan, I imagine like every 80-year-old in America is watching baseball. The average NBA fan, and they're sort of the young ones, are in their early 40s. And so sports as an industry is looking for ways to get younger. And by the way, it's not just that baseball, football, basketball content is not interesting to young people. It's that all of that content is trapped behind a television paywall that young people aren't subscribing to. And so if your content is there and you're young, then you're trying to reach a young audience, you're not succeeding because young people aren't there. Then along comes esports. Esports is has an average fan that's 24 years old. Our average fans are about 21, and these are fans who aren't watching traditional sports. And so we've chosen to kind of take a structure that looks a lot like traditional sports, the city-based model, franchises, media partners, sponsors, and apply it to this new phenomena of competitive gaming. And in doing so, we're creating an industry. And just in the past 6 months, I've brought 4 senior executives from the sports industry, from various sports leagues, from New York to Los Angeles. And there's opportunity to do more of that. There's opportunity to pull the best talent from the sports industry who are looking out at the future and not seeing growth into this new category of growth in the industry. That said, we also have a team of about 25 more junior and mid-level executives based in Columbus, Ohio, who I'm not moving to Los Angeles, because if I did that, I'd have to adjust their compensation for cost of living, double digits. We're keeping them there. So the challenge is, in this time when sort of virtual workforces are an option, and where I can get sort of economies of from having my workforce remote, and I'm not seeing real negative consequences of that. I'm certainly not pushing the company to make the kind of investments that we could in Los Angeles, which I think it means that it's going to take a little longer to establish LA and California more broadly as the sort of global headquarters for this new industry.
One thing in terms of you talking about investments is that there are different kinds of infrastructure that are essential. There's infrastructure in terms of broadband and technology-based infrastructure. There's infrastructure in terms of studio space. There's infrastructure in terms of transportation. One of the themes that's came up in our private session yesterday, and it's come up repeatedly, is that there's an infrastructure funding issue in California of a lot of different ways. How has a lack of infrastructure, whether to bring your workforce to work or the ability to get to and from where they live, or quite honestly even to film, been a factor in decision making and in trying to grow your business or move people around?
Well, at Coursera, we obviously were looking for engineers. We decided to get offices right along Caltrain because we know there's a huge population of young people that want to live up in San Francisco, and they don't really want to come down to the suburbs often until they have families. And so being on Caltrain is really, really valuable. And then we have a shuttle that we just take from Castro to our office, which is like 5 minutes. We also give out free Wi-Fi access points for everybody so they can work on the train. Every Wednesday we have the option, if people want to work from home, they can. Because if we said that you have to, and then in terms of our hours, a lot of the employees don't get in until 10 o'clock, and then they'll work a little bit later. And they're kind of online all the time. But we've had to really leverage that 1 quarter with Caltrain, put more technology so that people can be productive while they're in transit, and be much more flexible about where and when people work in order to be able to track these folks. If we didn't do that, I don't think we'd be able to get almost no talent from San Francisco to come down the peninsula to work at our headquarters.
Yeah. In our industry, a lot of the people that we work with are will come to Los Angeles, or we'll go to the location for a period of time during the time that we're shooting. So that might be 4 months, that might be 5 months. We used to relocate people. We'd give them a stipend. They'd come take an apartment and essentially live in Los Angeles, live at the relative location for that 4 or 5 month period. We're finding that is not an option anymore. People are requiring that we pay them daily housing allowance because housing is too expensive. We need to actually pick them up and take them to set every day because there is no adequate transportation for them to get to production locations. And you have an additional issue because we have unions. The entertainment business is a highly unionized business. And for somebody who is on a distant location, somebody who's come to Los Angeles to shoot a series, for instance, his workday starts when he leaves his house. Mm-hmm. So there is a real disincentive for people who perhaps can't afford to live close to work, have to live some distance away. They've got to work 2 extra hours a day. If they're housed out in the valley and it's an hour each way to get back and forth to work, I've got to either pay extra for those 2 extra hours of work time, where they're sitting in their, in the car trying to get to work, or have 2 hours of, 2 fewer work hours from them. So it's a real disincentive to, it's a very, very real, pragmatic, practical disincentive to our business not to have adequate infrastructure.
I can relate very much to what both Jeff and Sandra are saying. Very similar issues. I would say that it was a big decision for us. We are relocating our headquarters from San Francisco to Oakland in 2019. And part of that, for sure, was very much driven by access to transportation, the implications for our folks moving from San Francisco to Oakland. Certainly relied upon where is the transportation to be able to get people located, in those offices. But also in Southern California, when we think about all of our disparate locations and trying to figure out where is a headquarters that's really going to make sense. And certainly transportation is part of it. Where is the housing, and is the supply from a talent point of view going to be there? Is it a food desert or a health plan? And the idea of making sure that people can live lives that are healthy is equally important in the areas and the locations that we physically, put our headquarters, for instance, so that folks that we're hiring, both the supply is available in terms of higher education and where the talent is being generated from, they can live there, but they can live healthy lives there. So these are very fundamental in terms of the decisions for us and where we would locate. Is it affordable? And clearly, being in San Francisco is not a sustainable one.
Pete, you had mentioned when we were prepping for this panel that one of the policy changes you'd love to see is an extra lane on the 405. So,
Yeah, if anybody can make that happen, let's talk after the panel. Well, yeah, and I mentioned that because I spend time in our 2 main offices in Southern California, which are in Santa Monica and Irvine. Which on a good day is about an hour drive, and on a bad day,
Not that many good days.
I wouldn't be here on a bad. There aren't that many good days, and so yeah, I don't know if that was a serious proposal, but I do think, and I also don't know how common our situation is. I think our CEO maybe when he bought the company that's based in Irvine should have thought about a relocation plan.
But that's an issue, because if it's an issue for you, the number of people who have to go back and forth, the number of people who do business, and it becomes a situation where, especially, I know from my experience, I've had this both down in LA and in the Bay Area, where people used to say, well, I can schedule several meetings in LA in the same day, or I can schedule several meetings in San Francisco and Oakland. People would actually talk about scheduling sets of meetings in San Francisco and then going down to Silicon Valley. I don't hear that much anymore. When I'm talking to people who are coming from New York, or people who are coming from Washington, or coming from Boston, or whatever, they've gotten reality checks. I've actually had people say, I thought I was so smart. I was going to do a whirlwind trip. I was going to do 3 meetings in San Francisco, go down for a late lunch in San Jose, go down in the evening, and I'd get back up again. No, that's no longer the reality. So that does have an additional factor in doing business.
I just wanted to just give, this isn't really Sunrun specific, but more my East Coast specific, having had my whole career till 2 years ago on the East Coast, is it still really surprises me the lack of investment in public transportation in California, and particularly in LA. I was speaking earlier, I have a college-age son who grew up his high school years in Baltimore and was able to get around with buses and whatever he needed. Last summer spent it with me in San Francisco and was able to take transit, but this summer he's in LA and we had to get him a car, right? And I think that to me, I know there is some transit there, but it's just something that I guess historically, wasn't built in. I've heard rumors that it was the power of AAA back in the 60s that undermined the transit system. But, given the climate change challenge that we have and that Sunrun is very focused on, I would think we would want to think really hard before continuing to expand lanes of highways, because expanding lanes of highways means more people get in their cars versus getting in and upgrading the BART, or, I take an express bus in the morning from Oakland, and I love it, but I think that's kind of how I grew up in some of the cities that I lived in, and I do think seriously that's really got to be a focus to reduce emissions and to get some of the traffic off the roads in California.
Well, I agree. We also, when we started running that little shuttle, and it's less than a mile from the Caltrain station to our office, ridership on Caltrain went way up. Every day when I drive from Palo Alto to Mountain View, I drive past the Google car, the Waymo shop, and I see the Waymos all over the place. So my observation is that the last mile is going to get solved quite nicely by automated driving technology in the not too distant future. What the market, I think, can't really solve is the big moving a lot of bodies efficiently from point A to point B, where that's kind of a long distance. So I'd say upgrade the major arteries and don't worry so much about the capillaries, because I think technology and the markets are going to do a pretty decent and efficient job moving people around in smaller automated vehicles that can go, that last little connection point. But the market's not going to be able to fix the really big issues of how do you move thousands of people from point A to point B so that they can get into a different labor market.
Well, I'd also say that this is a problem that's solved with multiple solutions, some of which have been mentioned. The other thing is that it is true that an awful lot of people can work very effectively remotely. And so having an employment mindset that is more and more and more pervasively about digital access, and having an employment practice that says we're going to be more open to flexible work arrangements, which actually, in fact, in the state of California, then does raise the question around, if you can effectively have a percentage of your workforce that's working remotely, do they have to be in California,
Right.
the highest tax state in the union? And so these are the kinds of things that I think require multiple solutions, and certainly contributing from an environmental point of view in a positive way is part of it, but also enabling technology and having work practices that are as flexible as possible so people can work remotely. And then the question is, do they have to be here in the state of California?
Yeah, working remotely, though, doesn't work for every industry. For my industry, for instance, it's not an option. The whole nature of making entertainment is a collaborative process, people getting together in one place. It's not an issue. And it's something, we cannot ignore as a state. Entertainment is one of the two largest exports of this country. It is a legacy industry. Lionsgate, which is not the largest company out there, spends about $1.5 billion a year on entertainment content, on creating content. It's $1.5 billion a year that should be spent here and is not being spent here because we don't have the infrastructure. That is something we have to really pay attention to. It is too big an industry not to take that seriously.
Well, and it's one of a couple industries that I think have made California such a great talent magnet. Technology, one of the other ones, but there are others. I mean, wine and healthcare, and so many.
We drink a lot of wine.
We do, and we make a lot. But there's part of the mythology of California is the idea that this is where you need to be. And I think the more we just throw our hands in the air and say, well, infrastructure is a problem, but that's okay because people can just work remotely, the more we sort of risk losing that magic that brings people here in the first place.
Yeah, my point is that we have to solve this problem with multiple levers, not to suggest that it is the only solution, working remotely, but it will become more and more pervasive as folks like our kids are growing up in a digital age that expect those kinds of work practices. But I agree that there's a lot to be done around infrastructure as well.
One of the things also just to mention, because I will say that there is a slight geographic bias of the panel, and that everybody is located in a major city and technology and talent cluster. But California is actually geographically very diverse, and one of the things that comes up both in the infrastructure side, but also just on the talent and opportunity side, is what about the concentrations of talent and the ability to create opportunities for people located in other parts of the state? As you see, agriculture is increasingly automating, that you see cost pressures overall from the state in issues that where in the food industry, whether it's food processing, food collecting, otherwise, that you need to have skills and talent. What do you do if you're dealing with, you want to build a business up in a lower cost center, if you want to do it in Fresno, or you want to do it in Chico, or you want to do it in San Bernardino? Is it possible? Is it both from an infrastructure standpoint, from a talent standpoint, and even from a shall we say, even from a regulatory standpoint?
Yeah, well, I should have mentioned this when I did the introduction of Sunrun. We are not just in San Francisco. Our jobs, most of our jobs, are installers and salespeople. And they're great paying jobs. We bring workers in so we have folks throughout California. And this was an issue that came up last year when it was one of the first tariffs that was put on by the president was on solar panels and solar cells. And we had a lot of advocacy around jobs because these are jobs that are not exportable and that create skills for workers who have high school educations, who we then train. And we have many stories of our employees across California who have come in, started out sort of as an entry installer, then became a supervisor, then become foreman, and are really part of this growing industry of skilled workers who are trained doing something that they love because it's consistent with this more sustainable economy. So I think that it is really important. It's one of the reasons that we think that distributed energy and distributed solar has such a critical role to play in California's economy going forward, because it is a source of jobs for a broader range of citizens in California that gives them a good wage and opportunity to grow and contribute to their communities.
So yeah, to your question, yes, you can locate in places apart from, LA or apart from San Francisco, and we do that across the state. It still comes down to multiple factors. Again, is there housing? Is there talent supply? Is there higher education that's available to be able to produce that talent supply? Is it a food desert? Can people live healthy lives in those particular areas? And it is going to limit you to certain centers. Insofar as the kinds of workers that we're looking for, I don't know if anybody saw on LinkedIn recently the most significant gaps in terms of the talent supply in the state. Really, top two were in the healthcare industry. So for us, we certainly try to locate in different centers across the state of California, Sacramento here, El Dorado's Hills, for instance, but it limited to certain types of workers based on the supply.
And that's a significant issue, especially as we're trying to get people opportunities going up further. One of the things that actually came up in some of the statistics we quoted in advance of the gender diversity panel at lunch is that women actually have a slightly lower educational attainment level on average in California than the national average, which is really surprising. But that's also but I will note it's also true for men in California as well, that this has actually been something where capacity has not necessarily kept up with demand. There's also been increasing number of immigrants who've moved into the state and more educated people who've moved out, going back to the recession of the early 90s when a whole bunch of aerospace workers moved out of the state. But that's an issue. If you're talking about education, where for a lot of different people, how do people get the educational opportunities and the skills they need to match up with this? I mean, some companies obviously have the ability to train people up internally, but a lot of companies, smaller ones, do not.
So one example I think is instructive, and we're seeing it here in the States, and I think we're going to start seeing it elsewhere. The example being Google, who decided that they were going to deal with the IT talent shortage by training their own IT people. So they created a training curriculum, and they realized that IT is the kind of profession that's pretty accessible. So they designed it such that someone with no college degree and no technical background could become an IT professional I work at Google. And it was so successful that they called Coursera and they said, we want to put our training program on Coursera so that anyone in the world with no college degree and no technical background can go through a series of courses fully online and become a qualified IT professional. So we co-authored this set of courses and we launched it, and it's now one of our best-selling courses. 40,000 people have enrolled. Google is actually writing scholarships so that people can actually enroll in these courses. And then we work with Google, since we have 1,400 companies who've hired Coursera, we know that a lot of them are looking for IT professionals. So we said, well, would you like to be introduced to all the people who are now completing the Google IT certification because they've got the skills and you're looking for the talent? So we've actually started creating hiring relationships between our learners and our enterprise employers. And I think that really is a way to close these skills gaps, is to let people start with no prerequisites. And, it's not just Google. At the University of Pennsylvania, first Ivy League degree that we just launched is a master's in computers and information technology. We announced it 3 weeks ago. It is a third of the tuition of the on-campus program. It's the same degree that you get from UPenn. There is no required technical background to get a master's in computers and information technology from Penn. It's 2 years, it's $23,000, and it will vastly increase the career opportunities for people who didn't do computer science as an undergrad, but now realize there's a lot of jobs in the future for those who have a computer science background.
Quite something.
Fantastic.
Sandra, you've got a slightly different circumstance when we did a study last year on the entertainment industry in LA, where we determined that there really is not a talent gap at all. And as a matter of fact, there are lots and lots of people who want to be in the entertainment industry. It's in a lot of ways it's an opportunity gap. So what's being done in terms of addressing issues of access and opportunity, and are there other states that are doing it better?
There are some states that are doing it better, as I alluded to earlier. New Mexico has done a very, very good job of the governor have worked out an arrangement with the unions to have the unions train unskilled people in the various crafts, because again, it's a highly unionized business, with a guarantee of jobs afterwards. So they have done, it required a lot of pressure from the governor to put a great deal of pressure on the unions to create this program, but it has worked out very, very well. We have a fully trained team of people in New Mexico who are fully employed. In Los Angeles, a big focus has been on trying to create a workforce, both in front of and behind the camera, that mirrors the population, what the population in general looks like. And that means creating opportunities for people of diverse backgrounds. We're starting to see more TV shows that are reflecting diversity. It's something Lionsgate has really been in the forefront of for many years. Dear White People on Netflix, Orange is the New Black on Netflix. Our crew, our cast, our producers, largely from underserved populations, underserved and underrepresented. But that's largely been a self-policing initiative. The studios all have diversity programs. We have a training program for directors to give them the skills to shadow train directors, to learn the skills so that they can move into becoming directors themselves. The various networks have diversity programs to where they will fund writers, diverse writers, for each of the shows that are being produced, so that writers get an opportunity to work in the industry and get the experience. But there have not been any initiatives of any real meaning on a legislative basis. It's really been self-policing. As I say, Lionsgate has been really at the forefront of that. It's been something that's been very, very, very important to us. But that has been a company-wide initiative with very little legislative support.
As a matter of fact, the first thing I know that was even legislative was in the renewal of the incentive bill. There's a provision in there to try and look at diversity efforts or diversity plans in terms of qualifying for the incentives. But then once again, if you can't get into the incentives, you have no incentivization yourself to.
That's right. And there's no teeth to that. It's aspirational. This would be a good idea, but it's not as though there's a point system and you get points or you lose points for widening your net, casting a wider net. It doesn't really have any teeth.
Now, just following up on that, Pete, you've got an industry where there's you have to have a certain amount of access to game systems, computers, otherwise just to be involved, and there is definitely a gender issue that often comes up. What are you doing in that regard in terms of trying to broaden who's involved in the leagues and who participates and why?
Yeah, there's certainly a perceived gender issue, and I think in practice also, over the past decade or so, there've been plenty of examples of just sort of mistreatment of girls, women, other groups of people online by gamer communities, and so I think the gaming community broadly and the industry has been challenged and is trying to overcome that. The way that we think about it is that I mentioned before that we're viewing esports as an opportunity to sort of reset the sports industry. I mean, if you think about where we sit at this intersection of gaming and sports, which are two industries that are historically dominated by white males, and so, but just taking sports, if you view this as a chance to kind of to relaunch, the sports industry 2.0, then there's an opportunity to do things a lot differently. And so, by starting with the game that we're working with, Overwatch, we think we're off to a good start. Overwatch is a game that is, for those who don't know it, it's this sort of bright, colorful, optimistic, positive, almost like cartoonish version of a really good version of Future Earth. About half of the characters that you can play in the game are female. There are LGBT characters in the game. There are characters with disabilities. It's this very sort of inclusive world that the team that built Overwatch created. And so it's the perfect game for us to use to try to relaunch the sports industry. We have a female player in our league. We go out of our way to celebrate. And so she plays underscore that. Let me underscore that point. Well, how many female players are there in the NBA? Or the NFL, right? And so yes, one, but we're off to a pretty good start. We think it's our first season, so we have a female player. We go out of our way to sort of celebrate up and coming female players and the fans of the league. We over-index with this league in terms of female audience relative to other esports leagues, and we're trying to sort of create a welcome home for groups who may not have thought of themselves as sports fans, to look at this league and say, oh, I don't love sports, but that one's okay.
I could just jump in on I missed the gender panel earlier, which I was sorry about, but one of the exciting things for us, I think, with this new energy future is the opportunity to really open up opportunity. Traditional energy companies have been, traditionally quite male, dominated from the people out in the field up to the executive suite. At Sunrun, one of the reasons I decided to move to California for this job is we have a woman CEO who just had a baby the other day. So definitely, a new generation of leader in my mind. And 50% of our executive team is female. Almost half of our board of directors is female, and we embraced the White House challenge in 2016 for the Equal Pay Pledge, and We achieved 100% pay parity this year. We're the first solar company to do that. And I just think that it's one of the things that I love so much about California. There has been a lot of concerns raised on this panel, but having those kind of, having legislation, which California had a few years ago, which said we are not allowed to ask the pay history of people when we interview and when we recruit, which was traditionally something that kept women back in terms of, you already had a lower pay, and now this was the history that came in, and it affected their ability to negotiate. So of course we're complying with the law. We did it before the law, and we're not asking that. And I think that, that is really one of the benefits of a state like California that's in the forefront and is creating and supporting companies like Sunrun that are bringing new bringing opportunity to women, people of color in ways that we don't always see in some of the other states that we operate in.
One thing I want to just ask is, because we like to conclude always with some sort of recommendation or some sort of idea, is that each of the businesses you represent employ people that we can fundamentally classify as middle class, at least traditionally, is the middle class opportunities. But one of the numbers that keeps coming up is issues of middle class families and affordability. That being whether it's in San Francisco, whether it's in LA, whether it's in San Diego, whether it's in Sacramento, and if you had one recommendation on something we could do to try and retain middle class families, the people who long term, so you can keep your workers with your company a long time, what's one thing that the state or cities or others could do, policymakers could do, that would help that? Pete, do you have?
I think it's hard for me not to just go straight to public education. In LA, there's this sort of myth that there are only a few neighborhoods where it's okay to send your kids to public schools. I don't know if it's true or not. I haven't sampled them all, but I know that my mother-in-law is a LAUSD elementary principal. Father-in-law is a longtime LAUSD high school English teacher, now debate coach. They're not in one of those neighborhoods where it's supposedly okay to send your kids, and they're great teachers and great educators. So I suspect that people overstate the problem with public education in LA. But whether it's myth or true, I think we have to break it and break the idea that in order to be a sort of a successful family in Los Angeles, you have to either live in a certain neighborhood or send your kids to private school.
Sandra?
I look under the general rubric of cost of living, and I think the major impediment to attracting good middle-class families to California is the high state tax. State tax, real estate tax.
Got it? All right.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I do think, given, as I shared earlier, that we're 193% of the national average in cost of living, and housing is 360%. I'd have to say that is probably the greatest lever for us in terms of trying to help people stay here and live fruitful lives.
Probably not surprisingly, I'd have to agree with Pete. I think that that a lot of the cost of living is not enough housing and not enough talent. So wages go up and people bid up the rents and the prices of houses. What is now possible in education, especially among adults, is so much different than it was 5 years ago. Radically different than it was 5 years ago. The California initiative to open up an online community college is spot on, and I would look much more broadly at how you can utilize the power and the prestige and the asset of the UCs and the state schools and the community colleges together as a system to dramatically change the access and quality to education. I think all the pieces are actually quite close to being there, and the way technology works now, it can unlock a lot of that potential.
Yeah, I was very excited about everything you said on online education. I'd have to say, I think it's the housing issue. I was really moved by Senator Wiener's comments last night at dinner, where we heard him talk very passionately about just the need to bring bipartisan support to increase density of housing so that we can make more affordable housing. I think that it's not just the issue of people who are homeless, who obviously, have a right to housing in my mind, but it's the fact that we just need more physical housing. It's a problem that should be able to be solved. One thing I'm really excited about, I guess it can end us on another positive note, is that another regulation that was just approved was that new housing in California starting in 2020 is required to have solar on it. And it's interesting because some people might say, well, that's an extra expense. We think it's going to dramatically reduce the cost of having access to solar energy, which is then going to reduce the cost of that ongoing, what do you do when you have a house and you have a house that's inefficient? They're going to have a clean energy source. And we're excited about working with the building industry and working to encourage greater housing development with energy efficiency, with solar power, hopefully some storage as well, so that we move towards, just a more cost-efficient system and more opportunity for good housing for people.
Great. Well, it is indeed a positive note to end on, and for that I would like to thank all of our wonderful panel and thank all of you for being here, both for the session and for the policy summit.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan?
Kevin, thank you very much. And thanks again to all of our panelists and all our attendees today. But I have to tell all of you who stuck it out to the end, I think you'd agree with me, that as impressive and impactful as the earlier discussions were, what we heard from